Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Jonathan Bennett joins me. We're going to be talking about RavenDB, a NoSQL database, but it has ACID transactions. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Jonathan Bennett. Episode 530, recorded May 15th, 2019. RavenDB. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Deploy and scale your apps seamlessly on the simplest cloud platform. Join over 150,000 businesses that use DigitalOcean. Sign up today and receive a free $100 credit at do.co/twit. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day and totally unaware of it, projects you might want to download right after the show and play with it. But today's going to be one of those. Hey, joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Jonathan Bennett. Jonathan, welcome.
Hey, Randal, it's good to be here once again.
And you're back in Oklahoma, I see.
Yes. Wave when you fly over. Here in Lawton, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I do occasionally fly over it. I think the last time I flew over it was only a couple months ago. I am once again in the kitchen set, as we call it, in Tijuana, in my home away from home. And for a challenge, because I said those magnets have never been moved, I moved one of them. I'll get out of the way for a second. Okay. The challenge is to figure out which magnet I moved by going back to any of the 30 shows I've done here before and figuring out what magnet I moved. There's no prize except to be the first person to tweet it. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Anyway, enough of that. Today we have an interesting show. I love NoSQL databases, and this is one of those. It's RavenDB, and we have Oren, Eini, I forgot to ask him how to pronounce his last name. I hope that wasn't too bad. Is going to be coming on the show. He's one of the co-founders of the project, and he's been working on this for a long time. Oh, it's project founder, sorry, there we go. And has been working on this for over a decade. Oh my God. Well, I'm the first notice, so we'll see how that works out. Anyway, he'll be on in a minute or two to talk to us about that. What I know so far is it's NoSQL. Simon Phipps would call this an open core project where kind of there's a starter kit you get for free, community supported, and then to actually do anything serious with this, you'll be paying a licensing fee to them. So we'll talk about that a bit later in the show, though. But I'm definitely going to be channeling Simon today. I'm pretty sure about that. And it's an interesting kind of NoSQL because it has ACID compliance, which is sort of interesting because that's always been somewhat the Achilles heel of the traditional document databases like this. So we'll talk about how Raven is actually different on this. So that'll be a lot of fun too. What do you think so far, Jonathan?
So Randal's a little discombobulated today. We had some technical difficulties before the show started. So yeah, RavenDB, I'm not super familiar with it. It's not something I've ever used, but there's some interesting things about it. You hit a couple of the highlights, but one of the things that stands out to me is it's written in C#. You don't ever see databases written in C#. So I'm curious to learn about how that has impacted their workflow and their usage and whether they see advantages from it, disadvantages from it, and how that's worked out. Because it's so odd, and so I'll definitely have some questions about that. But other than that, just looking forward to learning about the project and seeing what they're up to.
Sure, yeah, and I should just say for people that are trying to watch the video and figure out why my lips aren't matching with what I'm saying, I was supposed to be able to use my RJ45 to cut into the apartment's hub, and my RJ45 adapter broke just before this show. So, maybe sometime in the last week or two. But anyway, so I'm on Wi-Fi, and I really hate being on Wi-Fi because everything gets out of sync here. But we'll see. We'll see how many dropouts that leads to. But before we bring on Oren, let's go ahead and have an important message here, because this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Easily run production applications with DigitalOcean, a scalable compute platform with add-on storage, security, and monitoring capabilities. We make it simple to launch in the cloud and scale up as you grow, whether you're running one virtual machine or 10,000. Spin up your choice of a virtual machine in just 55 seconds. Standard, general purpose, or CPU optimized configurations provide flexibility to build, test, and grow your application. DigitalOcean is designed for developers and operators. Over 2,000 open source tutorials are available. The easy-to-use control panel and API lets developers spend more time coding and less time managing their infrastructure. Use Kubernetes to improve availability, scalability, and resource efficiency of containerized apps. On DigitalOcean's marketplace, deploy pre-configured one-click applications including LAMP, Docker, GitLab, Jenkins, Plesk, cPanel, WordPress, and many more. Secure and control the traffic to your applications with your own private network, virtual private cloud, traffic filtering, and load balancing. Industry-leading price to performance. Offers flexible server configurations sized for any applications. Predictable pricing that is the same across all regions and usage volumes. And included at no additional cost, cloud firewalls, monitoring and alerts, team accounts, full DNS management, 99.99% uptime SLA, 12 global data centers means you have the connectivity and redundancy you need to provide the best service to your customers. 24/7, 365 world-class support. DigitalOcean is trusted by over 1 million developers. Go to do.co/twit today, sign up, and receive a free $100 credit. That's do.co/twit for a free $100 credit. DigitalOcean, designed for developers, built for businesses. And we thank DigitalOcean for their support of FLOSS Weekly. Let's go ahead and bring Oren on. Oren, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And how do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's Oren Eini.
Eini. See, I totally blew it. I should have asked before the show started, but I didn't get enough time.
More than used to that.
It's like people spelling Randal with 2 L's when they're trying to write my name down. It's sort of a thing I've gotten used to over the years. So, and where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking from Israel. Right now,
Israel, okay.
Office in Caesarea.
Okay, good. So it's like, 10 o'clock at night already or something?
No, it's just about 8 p.m.
Oh, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. It's not like last week when we had a guy from the UK on our show, one of our co-hosts, calling in to a show that was starting at 2 p.m. U.S. So it was like really crazy for him. All right, good. So give us a 30,000-foot view. When I'm reaching for RavenDB, what problem am I solving?
You want to solve data persistence in OLTP application, in business application. They tend to be relatively complex application in terms of the amount and complexity of the data that you use. The typical use case is when you actually have an application where the domain model is complex. If you try to do that in a relational database, you're going to end up with dozens or hundreds of tables, and the constant complexity of just managing queries, schemas, runtime updates, stuff like that is overwhelming. I started building RavenDB because I was working as a database performance consultant, and the thing that always annoyed me and was really, really frustrating was seeing team after team after team of some really smart people coming in and running into the exact same problems. And that made no sense until I realized that they were all running in the same environment, all facing the same challenges. And the reason RavenDB exists is that I wanted to fix that, to give you an option to build, actually goes for the other way around. Start from what I need to build a business application, what are the features that are important and required, and then go back and build a database.
Okay, cool. And so you started it on your own? Are you working with a team of people now to continue development on it?
I started... 2007 was when I started actually looking at that seriously. 2008, I spent mostly doodling around, doing design work and stuff like that. I did not want to build RavenDB. Building a database is a huge task, and even a decade ago when I started, it was clear to me that this is way too big. But you mentioned 2 p.m. Try waking up at 2 a.m. with the component of a database showing up on the bedroom ceiling. And this is what I did for weeks on end. I have a blog, and I posted a 12-piece part of the design of a document database just to get it out of my head. And eventually what happened was that I decided, you know what, I'm going to spend one weekend. and look into just getting out there, making sure that it's out of my head, it's in code, I can prove to myself that this is not possible for me to build it on my own, and I can move on and do other stuff, paid work. So I spent the weekend doing that, and that turned out into 6 months. And I sat down and actually had to have a heart-to-heart with myself, which is pretty difficult, but I got a meal and it worked. And basically we had a discussion about this is not a feasible... seriously, it was like, this is not feasible. You can't take the GPL to the grocery store and ask to get some food. So I decided that I basically took a napkin and wrote a business plan. And the business plan was, let's spend 6 months on that, run out all of my savings and stuff, fail, and then get back to stage zero and work from there. Because at this point, it was almost an obsession. And because I sat down and thought about how this is going to be, I knew that I wanted this to be something that I would be able to get paid for. So starting from the first release, we had the free HTML version and the commercial edition for most people. It came with, there's an name for that, some additional features, and support and all of the usual prerequisites. And we had the first 1.0 release in May of 2010, and that was amazing for me. Okay, now it's out there. I can wait, and no one will use that, and then I can say, okay, I try, move on to other stuff. And imagine my surprise that at some point I wake up and there is an email in my inbox saying, oh, there is a sale for RavenDB. I'm like, really? And that was, I think, November of 2010. And suddenly I started getting sales. And I think that the first... So one of the things that I did when we started RavenDB was to ask for help. I need people to assist me with certain things, and quite a few people came in and did some great stuff, including stuff that I wouldn't be able to, mostly of the UI. But I got people who came in, and there is a great developer, his name is Rob Ashton, and he got into an argument with me in the mailing list. He wanted to say, oh, I need a feature to do X, and I explained that this is not possible, and here is why. And we had an argument about that, and then eventually I just got tired of that and told him, look, I don't think this is possible. Show me the code. Show me how this can be possible. And he went away, and he came back in maybe 24 hours, and he sent me pull request. He says, okay, here it is. It's working. And I look at this code, and it was like 90%, 90 degrees angle to how I would approach something like that, and it solved the problem. The feature in question was automatic indexing based on the actual queries that you have to the database. So imagine that you get a query to RavenDB. RavenDB analyzes the query, says, oh, there is no index for that. Let me go ahead and create one for you automatically on the fly.
Ooh,
now, wow. Now, since then, again, 10 years ago, and since then it was improved many times, and now when we create an index, we take a look not on just this current query, but all of the previous query and history, and try to make sure that we optimize things. But this is an example of a feature that came from the community, basically by a guy that I fully expected to never hear from again. And that went on for a couple of years. Eventually, the amount of work that I had to deal with became too large to even manage, even with the community. And I'm pretty sure that any open source project leader will tell you that trying to get commitment from open source people is hard. So I started hiring people. We are currently at about 30 or 35 people who are getting paid to work on RavenDB in various roles, full-time people mostly. And we've been doing that as the primary source of revenue for the company for, I want to say, 8 or 7 years already.
Wow, very cool, very cool. So there's a lot of NoSQL databases. What distinguishes RavenDB from the rest of the herd?
There used to be these great comics that try to explain what NoSQL is. It was a couple of guys, and one of the guys says, "How do I query this database?" And the other guy says, "Well, Bob, what you need to do is, it's not a database, it's a distributed key value store. How do I query a distributed key value store? Oh, you write a distributed MapReduce function in Erlang. Did you just tell me to F myself?" Yes, I did. And the reason I remember this is that go back 12 years. And remember, all I did at that time frame was go to customers, see how problematic the database access pattern is, or just how problematic the database is, and work to fix that. And that was horrendously difficult. It was horrendously difficult because at one point, I had a customer who had spent, I think, over $1 million in hardware for their application. That was some sort of ad distribution network. So the database server cost about $1 million. And I'm looking and trying to figure out what's going on, and there are hitting there at the 70%, 80% CPU, memory is maxed out, everything. I look at something, and apparently their security system was generating a query, an expensive query with a lot of recursion and stuff like that, on each and every ad hit. What I did was I went and pulled all of the something like 5 to 10 million records from the SQL table, moved and put that in a dictionary and query on that. So instead of having to do something like 7-table join with a common table expression and recursion and a whole bunch of other stuff, you would be able to, we basically pre-computed the table, pre-computed the answer, and just do a table lookup. And that took me about a week of work. And that moved us from a database server that was 90%, 80% CPU to something that was basically idle. And after that, I just went home and looked at it and says, there's got to be something that I could do better than this. And I looked at the non-relational databases that were around. And the model was great. The way that you could structure the data made a lot more sense for business application. The problem was that, honestly, I would rather juggle rusty knives than try to take that to production. Again, with the write a distributed MapReduce function in Erlang. And what I set out to do is to build a database that made sense for business application and didn't give up all of the features that you get from a relational database. I'm talking about things like being able to dynamically query the data, being able to visual and see the data that you're looking at without going through hoops. So when I look at the what makes RavenDB interesting for a user, the primary reason is that it's going to make you less anxious. It's going to cause you less pain. And the reason I'm saying that is that quite early on the development of the product, we made an important decision about how do you actually fund the project. And we decided that the way that we want to fund the project is through licensing and not support. So there is a whole open source funding models, and we explicitly said that our support is a cost center. we don't want to turn that into a revenue setter. That create bad incentives for the actual product. So features like the automatic indexes, feature like auto-tuning ourselves on the fly, being able to self-monitor and alert, all sorts of things that are there specifically in order to reduce the amount of complexity that you have to deal with. We build features that are meant for an actual production system. A good example of that, we have a feature called lazy queries. And let's say that you have a web page and you need to show some pieces of data. Let's load the user profile so I can show the username based on his based on EDD, and I want to show the most recent order for this customer, and I want to show the most recent top task for this user. So that's 3 queries that you have to make, 3 very different queries. Lazy queries allow you to just write, I want to run this query, but lazily, this query lazily, this query lazily, and then say, okay, give me the results. And instead of going to the server 3 times, you're going to only hit the server once. Now, this is a small example. It's a really important feature for performance-conscious people, but it's something that is really, really hard to do in a relational database, in most other, in even most non-relational database, you don't have this ability. Redis has something similar where you can have a single round trip and send multiple queries, but I don't familiar with anything other than that does this. And we spent a lot of time working on features like that. Another example is when you have association between documents. Let's say that you have an order and you know that when you load the order document, you also need the details from the customer record. The typical way that you would do that in a relational database, you would do a join. In a non-relational database, you would have 2 queries. A join can be expensive, especially if you have multiple such relationships that you have to deal with. And if you have multiple such relationship in a NoSQL database, you have to make n queries to the database. And so one of the features that we have is something called include. And the idea here is that you tell the database, okay, give me the order, also give me the document that is pointed by the company property or the client property. And you get it all once in a single round trip. The funny thing is that at some point, we looked at the improvement in the performance of RavenDB, and we realized that we were fast enough that most of the time we actually spent waiting for the network. So we worked hard to reduce the network cost. Features such as transactions is hugely important to try to just reduce the cognitive load of that the developer has to deal with. Because if the database doesn't implement transactions and you need some level of consistency, then you're on the hook on trying to implement that. Now, I had to implement transactions, I think, 4 or 5 times at this point. That's tricky, hard, quite interesting, to be fair. Very interesting to do so. But not something that I think is viable for a business project. If you're paid to build, some system to manage insurance claim, and what you're spending is you're spending the time working on transactional management systems, someone is paying for something they don't need. And or worse, you have a system that actually needs transactions, but you don't. That's actually going to fail quite interestingly at the worst possible moment. So that's a major difference. Other things that we're doing, we have decided to we follow the open core model, but the way that we did it, we decide that what we want to do, we want to ensure that certain basic features are always there. So the community edition that we have include features such as security, including external certificate, TLS 1.2, all of those kind of things. The database servers come with the management studio and all of the monitoring tools right there. You don't have to pay to just do those kind of basic things.
So, Oren, it sounds like you're describing a database that is we've got SQL databases which are structured, and and you've got
Yes.
NoSQL databases, which are like totally unstructured, and you've got to do all that in your program. It almost sounds like you're describing something that sits in between the two. It's like we've got some structure, we can support some of these things, but we don't have the massive overhead of a full SQL database. Is that right?
Yes. I really wanted to give you the feeling that you're using the same familiar concepts. So I don't want you to start from scratch. I don't want you to have to learn everything from zero. You already have quite a lot of knowledge about how to build your systems. Let's match your expectation. This is actually really important. There is the term falling into the pit of success. And this is something that we have tried very hard to cause our users to do. Fall into the pit of success. The default thing that happens is the thing that you expect. Or vice versa. The thing that should happen is the thing that will driving you toward.
And then, so I've been whispered something in my ear to ask you about. There is a concept in databases called the CAP theorem, and to understand this,
Yes.
it's the same thing as someone saying, I can write you code, cheap, fast, or good. Pick any two. If you want it cheap, well, maybe I can get it to you fast, but it's not going to be any good. Kind of that concept. In databases, it's the idea of it's either going to be consistent, it's going to be available, or you're going to have partition tolerance, are the three concepts you've got in databases. And this is something that's kind of a truism in databases. What direction, which thing have you left out, we'll say, in RavenDB?
Depending on the version, we started by being we started by being a AP system, so available and partition tolerant. We did it while we're still working. For some reason, maybe it's there. So we started by being available and partition tolerant, well-built, transactional. When I'm saying transaction, I'm saying that you can have multiple documents being written in a single transaction, and you guarantee that they are being written in an atomic fashion on one node. You can wait until these get distributed to the other nodes, but you don't have to. One of the tenets that we follow in RavenDB is that we use the multi-master model for the data distribution. So you may write to multiple nodes at the same time. I was very heavily influenced by the Dynamo paper with the idea that if someone wrote something to the database, you should accept that and figure out how to distribute that to the rest of the system afterward. But first, accept the write. Because if you don't accept the write, the application is going to say, what am I supposed to do now? So we accept the write, and then we distribute it to the rest of the cluster. That leads to interesting failure cases. What happens if you have two modifications on the same document on two different servers? We have conflict resolution to handle that. You can actually write a script that does merges between two different versions of the document, or you can let RavenDB resolve that for you. But so the idea by default, your AP. Now, in some cases, you actually want to have higher level of consistency. I like to use the example of the lottery. When you sell a lottery ticket, you always want to accept the right. You always want to sell the lottery ticket. If the network connection is down, you will make sure that the data is being sent to the rest of the cluster afterward. But first, accept the ticket, get the money, don't give the user a bad error. Now, when you want to declare who the winner of the lottery is, you're never going to want to have two winners for the first prize. Yeah. So at that point, RavenDB allows you to switch on a per transaction basis to a CP model, to a consistent partition tolerance. In this model, when you send a transaction, you're not sending that to a node and say, just accept it and move on. I want you to only accept that if the majority of the nodes in the cluster have agreed to accept this transaction. This gives you the absolute guarantee that if the transaction has been accepted, it's no other transaction can overwrite the data, everything is globally consistent, etc., etc.
All right. So there's this. You talked a little bit about making money with open source, and Randal even mentioned this term open core in his intro. This is an open source project, but how usable is the open source code that's out there? So if someone just wanted to run the open source stuff, can they set up a usable instance? Can they actually do something useful with what the open source code that's out there and the open source licensing, or to do something really useful, they have to pay you guys for it?
You need to pay us in one of few cases. If you want some of the advanced features, which are a cross-cluster replication, if you want to use stuff like a ETL, widely distributed replication modes, encryption at rest, those kind of things. You also need to pay us if the amount of resources that you need to run your system successfully is too big. I think that the default community edition that we have gives you 3 cores to run on, and if you need more than that, then you typically would purchase a license.
All right. So does RavenDB use RQL, and what is that like to work with?
Yeah, that's a fun story. So about 2005 or so, it got to the point where most of the company was actually sitting and handling support. It felt like every time that we fixed a support incident, another one would come in. And remember what I told you about the treating support as a call center. So we sat down and we looked at what we're doing and figure out how to fix that, how to fix the software to handle that. And we had a great plan. Everything was working fine. We were on set to release the project. And then I did a bad thing. I sat down and I tried to look at something. And before that, the query language that he used to query RavenDB was a variant of the Lucene syntax. So basically, field : value. If you wanted to search for a user whose name is Oren, you would search for something like name : Oren. And that worked quite nicely for a long time. But as things got, and we wanted to have better features, it got complicated. So what happened is I was starting to play, and I decided to see what happened if I actually wrote a SQL dialect to query RavenDB. And at that point, I go to my team and tell them, okay, I'm going to take that release date, and I'm going to just wipe it off the calendar. We are now doing this because we cannot release the software without that. So that was a really, really big change to the way that we look at the project, because it touched on pretty much everything in the everything that touches revenue, everything that queries RavenDB, basically. And what we did was create a SQL, basically, which is familiar and easy for you to use. And right now, if you want to find a user whose name is Oren, you would say from users where name equal Oren. And the key here is that you no longer have the I need to learn yet another thing here. We have support for doing things like group by on very large set of data, and instead of being really, really complex, someone looks at the query and says, yeah, I know what's going on. It's boring, move on. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was upset. I'm doing magic here. I just think it works. And I realized that, okay, the fact that you don't think this is magic is a success on its own, because things work. And you probably won't call me to complain about those sort of things, because, things work.
There is a certain magic when you get your code or your program to the point to where it works and it's boring and there's nothing more to see. I mean, that's like the ultimate elegance when you hit that point.
we had a customer that upgraded his version from the previous one to this one, and he ran a test. And then he said that he didn't, he started investigating why it didn't work. And then he realized that it did work, but it worked so fast that something that used to take 20 seconds before now took 200 milliseconds or something like that. And he just kept repeating that over and over and over again because and I think like 6-7 times before he realized that, oh, this actually works. It's just fast enough that I don't need to think about this. And I remember being just smug about that for like a week, because that was an amazing thing to hear.
Yep. So you mentioned in the show notes that you sent us the whole commons clause issue. For those that don't know, which there probably aren't many because we've talked about it a little bit before, but Amazon has this tendency that if they find something, some open source project that they find really interesting, they will just say, oh, here, we'll take all the server code and we'll host it and charge people, 10% of what you want to charge them for this. And, there's been several open source projects that have problems with this. And so one of the solutions people have come up with is they will add into their license, one of the names for it is the commons clause, which is really a bad name, but they will add into their license a little clause that says you can use this for anything you want except selling it, selling the services that we sell. And this is, various takes on this, but it does seem to have helped at least some companies avoid getting cannibalized by Amazon. RavenDB sounds like it could be a service that Amazon, if they get interested in it, it's something that they could then sell and try to undercut you guys. But I noticed that you're using the AGPL for your server stuff that you released, the Affero GPL. Is that the solution that you've gone with instead of the Commons Clause? And what are your thoughts on that?
No, we've been using the Affero GPL the AGPL since the beginning, basically. And you will notice that other projects who are using the AGPL aren't safe from being taken over by a cloud provider that set their service. And I will try to give you an organized answer. So the open source definition includes a list of freedoms. One of those freedoms is the freedom for the user to not be constrained in his use of the software. And the typical example that they give is the do no evil clause. And the problem with you may not use this software for evil clause is that it's really, really vague. What is evil? One would say that writing a software to manage chicken nuggets factory is evil because you're killing chickens. Some other one would say that, defense projects are evil, a bunch of stuff like that. So you get into really confusing metrics. So the open source definition says, no, this is something that you cannot do in your open source license and call yourself an open source license, basically. The limitation on running your software in the cloud is a limitation that effectively make this a non-open source project. And I think that for our purposes, we have made a decision that if Amazon wants to run us and provide RavenDB as a service, then great. That's a great validation that we are doing quite well, and we'll deal with that as needed. But I think that it's more interesting because of the impact that it has on the overall system. I can tell you that not being an open source database is hard. In fact, I think that in general, Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle are probably the only databases that you will find that are in common use that are not open source. And trying to come up with a new database that is not open source is even harder. So there is a hard requirement for the source to be open in these cases if you want to have this kind of project. But for stuff as a service, database as a service, or general cloud services, if your project allows you to do things like if your monetary value is that, I want to run on the cloud and charge for that, and that's a really tough problem. It's especially tough problem if you realize that project that uses open core, such as Elasticsearch, Amazon just came out with OpenDistro a few weeks ago. And OpenDistro is basically the Apache portions of Elasticsearch with replacements for the stuff that Elastic basically sells. And the interesting here is that if I'm a VC looking to invest in a company, I would really want to have an answer for what do you do to prevent Amazon from copying you. And I think that the end result in the long run is that you're going to see a major shift in the landscape because of this.
Okay. So we do have a question from the chat room. Roswell, listening in, says, what are the number of people involved, committers, community, customers, etc.? What kind of outside involvement do you have?
Committers, last time I checked, was in the low hundreds. So 150, 250, something like that. In terms of users, the mailing list have something like 2,500 to 3,000 people subscribed. In terms of customers, I have a single customer who is deployed to over 1 million instances. Another one has deployed to 50,000 locations. One of the features that RavenDB has, and one of the reasons that the thought of Amazon competing by selling RavenDB doesn't bothers me as much, is that one of the end results, which was completely surprising for me, of the architecture of RavenDB is that it's very commonly used on the edge. So it's very common that you'd have a RavenDB cluster in the cloud, and then many, many nodes worldwide that are being served in as a local copies. So imagine, I would do a better job of explaining that with an example. Imagine that you're a healthcare provider, and you have clinics that are spread around the states or the nation. And in a clinic, you need to have the data, some patient data, some, what pharmaceuticals do I have at hand, a whole bunch of stuff. And you need to be able to both keep up to date with whatever you have in HQ and have HQ keep up to date with what you have. And at the same time, you need to be able to operate completely independently from everything else. If there is a network outage, the doctor must be able to accept patients. And RavenDB works very well in this scenario because of the multi-master architecture. So a lot of our customers are actually very widely deployed. And I think that's it.
Well, we're almost out of time. I guess, and for people who are actually looking at the clock on your podcasting device are going, well, wait, it's only about 45 minutes into the show. Well, we started late. So, we apologize for that, technical difficulties when we got started. So I have a couple of questions to sort of wrap up. First off, so are there client-side libraries for this in various languages?
Yeah. The actual interface is just REST-based, but just giving you REST interface is protein to do. So we have full-fledged clients for .NET, JVM, Go, Python, Node.js. We even have a client for C++, which is impressive because when I'm talking about the client, I'm talking about a full-blown client, stuff that does identity map, unit of work, change tracking, handle a lot of advanced features like the lazy queries that I mentioned. In .NET, we have full link support. We have a feature called subscription, for example, that allows you to subscribe to a query, get all of the results for the query, and then wait until, so whenever there is a new document that matches the subscribed query, you will immediately get that. Cool. And so, so that's really useful for business processing, for backend processing, stuff like that. We have a client who's actually wrote a whole bunch of scripts using Python that subscribe to changes, and they're able to mutate their system on the fly just by changing the script.
Wow. And so I presume since it's a RESTful API, that people have also been successful using this from smart JavaScript libraries like jQuery and things like that, right?
Yeah, we have an Node.js client, but yeah, you can just use it directly. One of the things that we have done, because one of the things that we have done in terms of security is to rely on TLS. So when you actually connect to RavenDB, you connect using HTTPS, and we're using a X509 client certificate for authentication. That means that from the browser, without doing anything else, you can actually make a highly secure call, and it will work, versus trying to implement encryption in JavaScript, which is, I've done that, it's bad, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can definitely imagine. Well, like I said, we're almost out of time. Is there anything we didn't ask that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before we have to let you go?
I think that the primary thing is that I spoke a lot of the features, but the primary thing that I think that RavenDB gives you is the idea that you don't need a full-time babysitter for a database. This is one of the most important things that we try to do. A good example of that, we had a case recently where a customer was running on AWS, and they were running on a T-something instance. And those kind of instances have burstable I/O by default. And that means that they set up the system, it's working beautifully, and at some point, they ran out of the burstable I/O credit, and they were hard throttling. So you move from something like 3,000 IOPS to 100 IOPS. And they very quickly realized that the problem was in the database. So they go into the database and trying to figure out why are you slow, and then RavenDB tells them in a big alert, hey, I detected that I'm running on slow IO. Here the list of IO operations that I made, how much they were and how much time it took. And the idea was in this feature to actually give you concrete information, to give you the smoking gun so you can go to the admin and see this is the problem. And I know about it because they talked to us as, I was able to go into the database, and from going to the database to fixing the problem with going to AWS and doing some provision IOPS, it took me 5 minutes instead of a quite expensive investigation into what is going on.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. So I have two final questions, since I know you're a coder. What's your favorite programming language?
C#.
Okay. And what text editor do you use?
Visual Studio for most day-to-day programming, Sublime for anything that I don't have to immediately compile.
Cool. Well, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I'm glad you got a chance to come on the show and talk about RavenDB. I'm sure quite a few people are going to be interested in playing with it a little bit, and we'll have the links in the show notes to get them over to your site, but just simply ravendb.net, and then everything else is linked from there. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. That was Oren Eini. I got it closer to that anyway. Talking to us about RavenDB. What do you think there, Jonathan?
So distributed databases aren't exactly my wheelhouse, but definitely interesting. So kind of the huge gorilla in the room with a project like this is the kind of open core nature of it, which of course, those of us that are kind of ideologically open source, we cringe at that. But at the same time, if somebody's doing this professionally, somebody's doing it full time, you've got to find a way to make money with it. And so it's just a decision that everybody has to make. And it sounds like they're trying to at least do it the right way. They've put their code out there in such a way that it is usable. You could do something useful with it, from what he was saying. So, but the technical aspects of it, I love the fact that he's found kind of a happy medium between a full structured query language and a full no SQL language, no structured query at all. It's very interesting. He's found that kind of medium, happy place in between. So, but yeah, other than that, interesting project and super neat guy. It was neat to talk to him.
Well, and it's also good to hear that at least early on, and possibly still now, there are people who feel important enough or feel good enough about how open source it actually is that they're willing to contribute to move him forward in terms of features and stuff. I mean, I know that there are some projects where all the development's done in secret, except they release a source code every 4 months or something, and it really doesn't feel like a community at that point. It really just feels like, well, you're open game only, and that goes. There's a whole range of possibilities with open source, and all the way to the other end where everything is all open source. Do whatever you want with any of it, like one of the BSDs or even Linux, I guess, in some ways, although with a more restrictive license. And I'm glad that we have all these options. And I tell you, in 12 years of doing this show, I've heard just about every possible combination of things. So I appreciate that at least the core of this is open. I can see how it works. I can port it to a new hardware if I want to. So that's a really good point that he's been able to get to that. So anything else before I run down the upcomings?
Yeah, we talk about how many contributors he's got. He said he's had over several hundred contributors. So I mean, they're doing something right. It's not every time I think about this, I think about, was it Eric Raymond that wrote The Cathedral and the Bazaar? I think it was Raymond. But anyway, this, the juxtaposition of these two ideas, and really a lot of projects end up somewhere in the middle. It's more of a gray scale. But to have over 100 contributors from the outside, they got to be doing something right.
Yeah, it's been real interesting. I mean, I said that at last week's show, was that there really is a scale all the way between closed source and completely open source. And we're happy to have people on if they're not completely closed source like they were a few weeks ago. that was an embarrassment. That was totally an embarrassment. But I didn't do my homework. I'm so sorry, guys. I've only made a few mistakes like that, so bear with me. All right, let's see who's coming up. We got next week we have Barrios Backup. It's a 100% open source fork of the backup project from baculo.org. So that'll be interesting. We'll talk about how forks happen. It's been around since late 2010, though. We have somebody coming to represent the IBM Cloud Platform, which is a commercial platform. But I met him at Cloud Foundry, which is a sort of a coalition of various cloud vendors and a bunch of software to make sure that your software is absolutely transportable between all these different vendors. So I'm sure he's going to pitch, a little bit about IBM Cloud Platform. And I hope it's not a sales guy. I hope it's actually a technical guy to talk about how Cloud Foundry actually works. I all bets are off so far because I haven't actually talked with the guy yet. It's working through a PR company again. But Cloud Foundry is really amazing. So you can have public, private, and hybrid environments and move your data back and forth between there. CryptPad is a private by design alternative to popular Office tools and cloud services. So all the content stored on CryptPad is encrypted before being sent. So this is unlike things like Dropbox where, if somebody breaks in, they can actually see your stuff. Actually, I don't think that's true anymore. I think it's actually all encrypted client side now, but I'm not sure. The Redis update, we had Redis on a while back. And speaking of Commons licenses, it's one of the things we're going to be talking about. We had them on a couple of years ago, but they said there's been a significant amount of stuff. And it's also a NoSQL database. It's an in-memory data structure stories. It's a database, cache, message broker. And it supports data structures such as strings, hashes, lists, sets, sorted sets with range queries, bitmaps, hyperlog logs, geospatial indexes with range queries, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I imagine anybody that's playing Buzzword Bingo was going to definitely do that. Oh, I forgot to ask about blockchain. Sorry, guy. There's one thing I left out of this show.
We ran out of time.
I did mention it though. So drink. That's it. As you're playing the drinking game, I did mention blockchain now twice. Okay, Opsy's coming after that. That's an open source client management system to manage heterogeneous environments. It enables the deployment and configuration from OSs and software on Windows and Linux computers. And finally, rounding out the current schedule, although I'm talking to a few more to get them filled in, but we're all the way up to like mid-July. So CX is a general purpose interpreted and compiled programming language with a very strict type system and a syntax similar to Golang. CX provides a new programming paradigm based on the concept of affordances, and the primary use for this is as a programming tool for Ethereum and other blockchains. There we go. Said it again. So for those who've been waiting for the next blockchain show, bingo, it's coming up in about 6 weeks. So that's good. You can go to the homepage for this show, twit.tv/floss. And if you have any other suggestions that aren't on that list, please tell the project leader or community coordinator to email me. Merlin at stonehenge.com is also right there on that front page. We do a live stream normally at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv. We took a number of questions today from the chat room. You can follow us at @FlossWeekly on Twitter. Follow me at Merlin on Twitter. I will soon hopefully get my medium.com channel set up for Floss Weekly, so we'll once again have a place to see who's upcoming, things like that, the way we were using Google Plus before. I will be in mid-June, which is not that far away. I was just buying my tickets today or yesterday. I'll be at the Perl Conference in Pittsburgh. So if you're in the Pittsburgh area, please, especially if you're coming to YAPC, the Perl Conference, please stop by and say hi. I'll be at OSCON in mid-July. That's in Portland, so it'll be a little bit easier to get to. And All Things Open in mid-October. I've been I'm representing Floss Weekly there. I'm still waiting to hear if my call for speakers to do a live coding in 45 minutes of a Flutter application. There we go, man. Too many words that start similar. So my Flutter app talk will be accepted, but they're still selecting the guests and stuff like that, the hosts, the speakers. There we go. Anything you want to plug there, Jonathan?
I will mention something. So over at hackaday.com, we are attempting to go weekly with a This Week in Security article. So hopefully Friday, there'll be a new article, which is kind of a recap of the things going on in computer security throughout the week. And we posted one just yesterday or the day before. We're not quite on the Fridays yet, but go check it out. And then also follow me at JP_Bennett on Twitter. And if you see something really interesting you think we should cover, point it out, and you may get a shout out.
Awesome. And thanks once again for being my co-host and covering most of the show so that my poor Wi-Fi desynchronizations weren't that obvious. So, and I was whispering in your ear a bunch of times, so it worked out pretty well. So thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here.
All right. And we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.